Hey folks, so in this section we're going to be doing basically a refresher on software process models. Now this is all going to be stuff you've kind of seen in other courses before, primarily SER315, SER215 or 216, a little bit in SER316. So here what we're going to start talking about is basically the different ways or different processes people use to develop software. Basically what we want to do is overview the different software models that are out there, right, that you might see in industry, and basically give you guys a kind of a refresher of what they all are. And then we'll basically have a discussion later on, hey, what are the advantages or disadvantages of these, right? When is one appropriate for something versus the other? The first thing we're going to really talk about is some basics, and also to set kind of the scene for these processes. Now, previously we talked a little bit about basically development, well, the business context of development. So we're going to start actually by building on that. So let me go forward a couple of slides. This is basically a rough outline of kind of the entire software process development flow, from inception right all the way up until development. And what I want to relate this to is actually the kind of the charts we've shown for project development, or project change, I guess, in our discussion on business context. And there, we basically had this graph that was expressed over time and showed how things like uncertainty, expenses, or revenue varied. So basically, I was showing basically the health of a project as it goes from very beginnings right to having something that's shippable. So this is a graph right basically shows different elements right of that kind of process right in terms of development that takes place kind of in the middle of that graph for our software products. So first of all, let's take a look at how we read this thing. So on the top here, basically I have different people, right? So things like business stakeholders, business analysts, architects, developers, QA, operations, customers, all these things here that are in the kind of the gray diamond looking thing, those are all kind of different, I want to say agents or people right in our system, right? They have something to do with something. Overall, and I should actually sketch this on top, overall, right, this is actually going to be a time flow we're talking through. So we're going to talk through basically these kind of common phases, right, in software development processes. So we're saying this is time, and the T here, right, this is somehow, time 0 over here versus over here is, time done. I don't know if that really counts as a time. We'll say that's time done. Okay, so talking to us, right, people on top, are different people basically involved with your project. The next part down here, right, are these orange things. So orange things somehow are ultimately things that look like constraints. Things that say, okay, this is your process has to work like this, right? We have to do X, Y, and Z, right? Whether that is in terms of a specific thing we're building, whether it's in terms of how we test it, or in terms of picking what we want to do, right? It's just some kind of outside constraints that are needed by what it is that we're trying to build. So we have things there like, for example, business roadmap, feasibility/cost analysis, legacy constraints, dev standards and practices, Q&A standards and tools, scripts and environment, right? So those are all things that are kind of the outside environment, if you would, right, that expresses some constraints on the process we're going to execute in order to develop our software. So that's what the orange circles there are indicating. Now the next thing down, right, are these rectangles, and the rectangles are really kind of our phases of software development, right? So these are maybe well, these are very, very kind of common and very fixed. This may look to some of you like waterfall model, and it's not specifically supposed to be that. Right now, we're just talking in terms of general process, right? So these are things, right, phases that could show up in any sort of model we choose to do our development with. We just wanted to basically, have things to talk about here, right? So don't get too fixed to that this is thinking that this is a specific model, right? Really, we're just showing a general flow. And there are things, right, that we'll talk about that basically can alter this. Things like we're looking at maybe doing incremental development or iterative development. Different things that may kind of change this. But just overall, right, these are the phases we're looking at. So we have to do something with requirements, right? We have to gather things, we have to specify things, to do design, right? We have to do basically analyze our requirements, try to determine what sort of architecture we need in order to build software to actually solve that problem. Implementation, right? Taking your design, taking your architecture, turning it over to people to actually go and implement it. Testing, right? So testing is going to be that. Hopefully you have that code base that's completed. You have something you can actually run that you can go and do verification. You can do validation, and make sure it's really the thing that you meant to build, and then it follows from your requirements. And then lastly, there we have deployment, right? We have to actually take that product that we've designed, built, implemented, tested, right, and then finally get it to market, right? Finally get it to our end user. So those kind of 5 steps there, right, you're going to see in basically all the different processes, just kind of in a different way, right? A different interpretation. Sometimes the models may kind of rearrange these, right, or they may repeat them. But these are overall things we expect to see when we're trying to build something. The last part there on the bottom, these little purple circles now, these are basically work products or deliverables. So these are basically the things we expect to have at the end of the day after we execute these different phases. So for example, right, requirements, well, the end of the requirements is hopefully something like a requirements document, right? A hard specification, right? I can basically tap and say, this is what it is, right? This is what we're going to construct. And that ends up being basically well, I guess I'll use the term input here, right? You have these arrows here. You can see basically that the output of requirements is this document. The input to design is also that same document, right? So this is showing basically how these phases are related. The flow between them, right, is basically that document that specifies the requirements is created in the first phase, and then passed to that design phase later on to basically to analyze. And so then we continue there, right, reading along. Design, right, has two work products, perhaps. Design documents, right, maybe some prototypes that you build. This is the result of our design, right? Some ideas of this is how we can lay out our system, and maybe some proof that, oh, yes, this will actually work. From there, right, we're basically going over to implementation. Say, okay, now we have this nice design. What do we have to do in terms of actually implementing it, right? So there, right, we have basically two outputs again, right? Our quality code and hopefully a release, right? So quality code, maybe there is a little bit of wishful thinking, right? Maybe sometimes we end up just have code from our phase 0 implementation, but really we're hoping that we have some sort of a decent code base, right, that's been built to a standard. And from that code base, we should basically have a product right then and there, right? Maybe it's not going to be completed, but we should have some sort of alpha product that we could put in front of somebody to test. And that's exactly what we'll do next. So we'll go basically on to our testing phase where we say, okay, our testing phase, we're going to take that initial release that was given to us, right? We're going to have some basically some ideas how we're going to test this, right? Specific test cases, specific maybe test plans. Maybe we refer back to our requirements and the type of user we're expecting, basically to identify what sort of test we need to run, and basically make a bunch of people have at it, right? A bunch of testers trying to basically verify that all of your different test cases, right? Stuff like that is actually producing the results that are required by your requirements document that you laid out earlier. Maybe right at the end of that, basically what you have is something that looks like a release candidate, right? You have kind of the results from testing, the matchup of requirements, and you have an RC that you can hopefully put in front of real users, not just your own testers that are getting paid to deal with your software, but real people, right? And so from there, right, you start looking at, okay, now we're going to pass this over to deployment, right, to distribution, to getting it out to the user, right, to having an actual release. So these are kind of the different phases that are involved. Maybe just to jump up back top. So again, right, this first part here, right, these rectangles, these diamonds, I guess. These are in terms of people, right? So you can kind of imagine, right, these different roles that have different basically purposes throughout your product. So you can also think of this in terms of, oh, things like, maybe over here you think back of, oh, the CTO is maybe active at the beginning of the project, right? Or maybe even the CTO, trying to draw an O there and then. Or maybe the CEO is active, right? Or maybe marketing is active. CEO. Right, and then all of a sudden other things over here, right, you start going and saying, okay, this is under the VP of engineering, right? Before, things pass along, maybe they go back to marketing, right? As you start to have customers involved over here, right? So maybe this is back to marketing. Or maybe you got the CTO again, right? If you're involved with things basically like operations, market, VP market, there you go. So basically, you can think of this as kind of a more specific zoomed-in view of that flow we talked about last week, and basically saying, okay, these are kind of the more specific, individual roles, right, that people have with respect to these different phases of process development. Okay, so next thing I want to do is talk about two basic principles of these processes that we'll be investigating. First is increments. So increments is basically saying the following. We have this project, we want to have all these features. Really, right, we can maybe identify some subset that is some maybe minimal viable product, right? Maybe something I can put in front of the end user. And I could basically analyze that, right, design that, implement that, test that, right? And I would have a release, right? I would have a single increment, right? It's not my complete product, but it is something that kind of stands alone. And then I could repeat that, right? I could basically extend my subset of features, right, and go through that flow again, build that out, have another product. And I could do this again and again and again. So this is incremental construction, basically building a product piecewise. This is going to be useful in terms of, this has many uses, and I suppose I'll leave those up for the discussion for you guys. But again, right, just thinking in terms of I'm building kind of subsets of products at a time. Maybe one example you can think of in terms of where people use this is you may have seen there's things like, for example, there's early access software. If you go and look online, it's really unfortunately common with games these days where people put out basically increments. They'll be like, okay, we do these features, put that out, put it in front of users, test it, get some feedback from them, then do another, then add some more features, do it again, put it out, basically release it, right, get more feedback, and incrementally add things until they get to kind of their full version of software. That's actually very common right now in terms of game development. Again, the point is let's do kind of subsections of the project at a time, right, and fully develop it and fully get something out there that I can put in front of an actual user, not just a tester, not just keep it in-house, but something I can actually put out there. So that's the idea of increments, building stuff piecewise. or I should say in terms of supersets each time. We want to grow our features. The other common thing we have in development is iteration. So a lot of the processes we're going to be talking about are somehow iterative, right? So you can think of in terms of, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then I'll do X, Y, and Z again, right? So I have a continuous process that basically is doing the same steps over and over and over again in a specific sequence. The idea really is refinement. So over time, right, as we go through our project, we're going to have basically a better idea of, well, this is our project, right? This is how our design holds up, right? We're going to understand our domain better. We're also going to have better requirements, because a lot of times what happens is, oh, the requirements are specified on day one, and then things change, right? Maybe they change because we find something new about the market. Maybe they change because something in the design is, maybe too costly for us to implement, right? So we have to kind of, X out that feature again, X out that feature. So basically, right, we have this kind of living project, if you would, right? The requirements are continuing to evolve, and hopefully they converge at some point. But we're doing this right in iteration, right? So we're going to basically step through those different software phases, do our best, right? Try to basically build what we can, right? And then basically update or refine our initial plans, right, in terms of our requirements, or yeah, maybe our overall timeline. Right, we do this again and again and again, producing prototypes, learning more about our design, revising requirements if needed. And eventually, I get to the point where requirements are solid, our design is solid, and our prototype basically converges to be, oh hey, this is now basically either my final end thing that I can build, that I can release, right, or maybe just I've learned enough that yeah, I'm pretty sure I can build the end result just as is. So iteration is very, very common. Mainly it's because it can address kind of the idea of changing requirements. Requirements, right, are something that we would really like to have set in stone, but unfortunately it's just not realistic, right? And so we do have to ultimately revisit our requirements, right, as we go through development and see how any changes there influence our design and influence our actual implementation. So there are plenty of approaches that use iteration. Let's see here: synchronize and stabilize, spiral development, RUP, XP, extreme programming. There are a bunch of different ones. Some of these we'll talk about a little bit more, like spiral or RUP, but I won't spend too much time now. So just some questions for you guys to think about. This is kind of your free discussion, right? So think about this for a few minutes. So the first question here is, what are the benefits of using a defined process for development? So here, right, we're saying, oh, there's going to be specific phases. Those phases are going to be linked up somehow, right? Maybe there's some overarching principles like doing increments or doing iteration. But what's the point of doing that, right? What is the benefit of having a defined software process? So think about that. That's question number one. Second question, are there drawbacks to using a defined process for development? So that question, maybe I won't elaborate on, but let you guys think about, right?